Welcome to another Nachi-free emergency live stream with Weltschmerz Stories and Captain Colepile. And actually, we've been meaning to do this one for a while because Captain Colepile also did a video on my Parkland shooting video that I did where it's true. Look, hey, man, I got a little too emotional, and the one thing I do want to say about the emotions, it wasn't so much because a lot of people have been like, oh man, you're virtue signaling and stuff. And it wasn't even so much for the high school kids, not that I don't care about them. But for me, I'll be honest, the main thing was it triggered my sense of self-preservation. That was the thing, because it just seems to be getting closer and closer. Living down here in South Florida, the Pulse nightclub shooting was up in Orlando. Then this, the next, a year and a half later, you get the Parkland school shooting, which is like the next city down closer to us. And then I'm like, when is it going to hit us? And the frequency is what, triggered me to go off. I will say this, in trying to understand all this, I think I might have jumped the gun in talking about banning guns. Okay, yes, I'm not for banning either, but we can find the right sensible solutions to this, dude. And by the way, when Captain Colepile did his video on mine, and he was, addressing the fact that, yes, I was concerned about what happened with the school shooting because of a friend's son who was in that school in Parkland. He related a story where his own son went to a high school where there was a hostage situation where fortunately nobody died. But if you want to talk about that a little bit, if you want to refresh us with it, Captain, because I remember you were arguing for guns and you were arguing against the ban, and you were basically saying, hey, listen, I know what this is like with my own son, not even like a friend's son, my own son being in a situation like this, and still you don't think that we should ban the guns. But I'm curious, after you, how do you call it, talk about the situation, I'm curious if you agree with some sensible solutions to this, man. But anyway, go ahead. Am I even there?
Cap, are you there?
Oh, Captain Cobalt there, or maybe, I know he said he was having trouble with his microphone or with his earphones, but anywho, well, maybe the whole point was, he dropped out, so maybe he's going to come back in. I see now he's coming back in. Captain.
Hey guys, sorry about that.
No.
Hey, I hate to cut this short, but I just got a kind of an emergency phone call.
Oh shit! No, go do what you got to do, man.
And I really, because I've been looking forward to this for weeks, but I hate to have to bail on you, but and that's what that phone call kind of cut me out. So, yeah.
No, go do what you got to do, man. Do what you got to do. We could do this again some other time. I mean, I could talk. Okay. I've been talking to Torsten about the Muenster thing. Hope everything's all right, man. Hope everything's all right.
It's going to be fine. I just got to go take care of something. It's not life or death. It's something I got to take care of.
No, go do what you got to do, man. If we're still around.
Hey, Torsten, it was good talking to you, buddy.
Yeah. We should continue this very soon.
Okay. I'll take care.
Okay, later, man. So anyway, we can still talk about this because I'm curious to see what you think about it, because I got the impression that you are not so much pro-gun. I don't want to say something like that, but you don't seem to be anti-gun either. But
yeah, that is a little bit of a problem, because in general I'm completely anti-gun. But I'm judging this from a German perspective, and here in Germany there is no reason to carry a gun. But when we talk about America, that is a completely different situation. So, and in this whole pro-gun debate, I had to learn a few things. I must admit that, and so I kind of changed my perspective on it. I understand why people want to carry guns. I understand that in some situations it is necessary in America to carry guns. The problem that I have is Do you really need like war rifles? Because that's what it is when we are talking about this whole AR-15 and AK-47 thing. That is something that is, in my opinion, that is a little bit over the top. So, but yeah. So that was a quick summary.
No, I was going to say, like the way you phrased it about the need to carry a gun. I don't think there's that much of a need to carry a gun. And granted, you don't have to have a gun. I don't think the United States is so bad that we have to have them. The way I see it, though, is that it is.
That was not my intention. I was not trying to say that, and I was not talking about like the United States is so bad. But for example, in Germany, when you go into the woods, the most dangerous animal you can see is like a fox or something. And in America, basically every animal can kill you. I mean, you have bears, you have like snakes, you have lions, you have all kinds of.
No, I don't think we have lions here. I don't think.
Not these
mountain lions. Maybe you meant mountain lions.
Mountain lions, yeah. So these kinds of animals. So that is a different thing. Like in Germany. In Germany, there is nothing around that can kill you besides a criminal. Yeah, so I was not trying to blame America in any way. So.
No. And it's funny, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of having guns just because of the larger animals that there are out there and stuff. For me, it's more of a home protection thing. And it was funny, right. After the last live stream I had, one of my friends called me up who was listening to it. And he brought up another really good point, which must seem kind of paranoid to a lot of people, and I hope it always remains just being a paranoid thing. But I do think having an armed populace or an armed civilians, that is the last line of defense if we ever had some sort of civil unrest. And that's not that far-fetched. That is really not that far-fetched, especially considering the 2016 elections and how many riots were breaking out and how many media outlets, and I'll be specific, like Rachel Maddow. Oh my God, I don't want to use the word hate, but oh man, I so cannot stand that woman. Her and Chris Hayes and all these, and yeah, here's where the word virtue signaling applies and stuff. They were actually justifying these riots. And I can give you the specific one, the one when Rachel Maddow was pretty much justifying what was going on in Milwaukee. Okay, like, well, you got to look at the other side of this too. And then the way CNN tried to cover up what the sister of the guy who was shot, it was a black man who was shot, but he was black. If I'm not mistaken, he was shot by a black police officer. This guy was threatening other people's lives. He had led them on a high-speed chase. Okay. And the woman on CNN, and then his sister, when she's being interviewed, she's like, we need to stop all the violence. And you're like, okay, that sounds good. And she's like, yeah, we need to stop burning down our own neighborhoods. And we're like, yeah, I agree with that too. Take that shit to their neighborhoods. Start burning down their neighborhoods.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, sure.
And then she's like, and then she kids around and she's saying, we need our weaves. And like, she's like making a joke about that. And CNN cut that out. Now, CNN had to, since they were there too, along with a bunch of other people, they saw the entirety of that. They saw it because it wasn't even, you didn't even have to be there for a full hour. It was like in the course of 3 minutes, this woman says this, and they choose to cut that out. And they make it seem like the sister of the victim, was calling for calm. I know she wasn't.
Yeah, but that is hypocrisy at its finest, in my opinion.
That is really opportunism. I think it goes beyond hypocrisy. It's opportunism. The other thing that was really bothersome was that the guy's father, the victim's father, he came out and he spoke about not being around for his son and how ashamed he was of having, probably influenced him with the thug life and thug culture. I think his father was an ex-pimp, whatever it was that his father was. His father's actually talking about that. You only saw that on conservative outlets, like maybe Fox. You would never see that on MSNBC. You would never see Rachel Maddow. Okay, Let me relax.
Yeah. But I mean, the whole TV thing is a big propaganda war, and that's, yeah, it has nothing to do with news. It has nothing to do with information. It is just propaganda from different sides. That is my opinion on it.
Granted, and but when this friend of mine after the live stream, he pointed that out, and he was like, "That's why you would probably want to have an AR-15, because an AR-15 is going to be able to keep, you know, a couple of fucking thugs at bay." And it's true. And an AR-15, I mean, for example, handguns are no match for someone with an AR-15. That's where I could sort of see it, and that's where I do agree, and that's why I'm a gun owner as well. I hope it never comes down to that, but it has. And here in Miami, we have not had any riots in a long time, but we have had them.
But let me ask you a question. Do you think it would be an advantage if people go to such a riot is a bad word, but say like a protest march or something, and they take their AR-15s with them? Do you think that would enhance the whole situation? That would make it better in any way? I mean, that is the last thing I would like to see at a protest, that the protesters carry firearms. I mean,
and that's the amazing thing. I forgot which ones. I think even in the one in Charlottesville, I noticed that there were clearly they had to have had a license for it, and they probably had to have checked with the cops first to let them know they had it. But I have seen photographs of some of these protests where one person is walking around with a fucking gun, and I think it was like an AR-15 or something like that. And I'm like, how did the police allow that? You know, no, I think guns, you got to be extremely careful with them is what I'm trying. And then that's the point I'm trying to make. And then what I'm finding, what I'm stumbling into is, as much as I can't stand let's, for the lack of a better term, extreme left and the social justice warriors and all that, I don't like its polar opposite either. I don't like the right wing, the right wing NRA faction, the ones that they cloak everything in terms of like these pseudo-intellectual arguments. Is really,
yeah, but I mean, I think that Cap made a fair argument in his videos, and he said that the NRA is basically a union for gun owners, and they do what they have to do. They do what their union members expect them to do. So I cannot really blame them for that.
Yeah. Yes and no. I would say that first of all, I could blame them.
We can always blame NRA, no problem. But I think it's a fair argument.
Right. Somebody has. We already have too much gun control. Not 1 inch more. The only gun control that I'm like starting to see that I think would make sense is requiring people to get a license. Somebody else, Nachi, you got to choose one: be a commie or a Nazi. Memes of destruction. Guns are a necessity. I would agree with guns being a necessity, but dude, you could actually. Oh, and here's Ogre. Hey, Cap, Nachi. And let me see. The thing is, again, sorry that I'm not inviting anybody else in because it just becomes a clusterfuck. MC is saying no license. Why would you put no license, dude? Why? Go ahead and tell me why. I'm curious to type it out. I'll read it, dude. I don't get this. That is the problem. The ease and availability with which people have to acquire these guns, especially young people. You are saying licenses are required for writs? I'm assuming you misspelled rights. I'm assuming you misspelled it. Daily reminder that in the 1950s, a 14-year-old could save up his money, go down to the hardware store and buy his first rifle. No questions asked. He's a beauty. Dude, oh man. This is precisely what I'm talking about. The comments that are coming up, this is what I can't stand hearing from people. It's just, Yeah, and then like for example, on the last one, I'm going to read you this one comment, which just for me, this is the problem with the quote unquote right, people on the right and their, their thing. Like when I was talking about that, like getting some licensing for the guns, and people are like,
I think you made a very important point. I mean, a teenager basically can go into a store and buy a gun, and then and we don't allow him to buy alcohol, but we allow him to buy a military gun, and I don't understand that. I mean, we are talking about kids here, and they barely know what they do. I mean, there's a reason why they can't sign contracts and all kind of stuff, but we allow them to carry guns. I mean, that's ridiculous in my opinion.
Yeah. And then of course I got this one guy, he left comments, Count Spartula, and then I had written, it's, about owning guns. It's not simply a right, it's a privilege, just like driving. And then he's like, and you have already flown in the face of the Second Amendment. Let me quote it to you. So then, and that's my point. Maybe I'm just not expressing it well. The sanctimony and the sanctity that is given to the Second Amendment, which I respect as well, dude, but you can make adjustments. You really can, dude. It's just like, look, man, I'm all for being honest, and I'm sorry to drag in your country, Germany, into this analogy, okay? But I've heard this.
Go ahead. No. I'm used to it. Go ahead.
Huh?
Then you're dragging Germany into it. So,
right. So then here's and no, we're going to drag Germany back in with the whole thing with Muenster. The thing was, and I've heard this from other people, the whole thing about lying, about being honest. You want to be as honest as possible at every single chance. Is white lies or even to the point of white lies, you got to see why you should never lie at all. There should never be an exception. But then you're like, well, what if you were 1930s Germany and you've got the Gestapo coming over to your house and you actually have Jewish friends that you're actually trying to save their lives. And then the Gestapo have one very simple question. Are there any Jews in the house? Okay, I know that's a terrible German accent, but I'm trying to liven this up. And then are you going to be so sanctimonious with the concept of being honest that you're going to be like, you know what? I cannot lie. I cannot lie. So yes, unfortunately, there is a family of Jewish people here, but can you please? Or are you just going to say, no, there's no Jewish people here? As a matter of fact, I hate Jews and Heil Hitler. Is that what you're going to do? You know what I'm saying? I would rather lie. You lie to save the lives of people. And I think it's the same thing with the Second Amendment. People are looking at it as if it's this, I guess, like a golden calf. I don't know how else to describe it. They put it on such a pedestal. And it's like, dude, you can have the Second Amendment, but still require people to get some sort of license so you could weed out the mental cases. It's so, I just don't get, you know what it is? I don't know how to express this other than feeling the same frustration. Now, I don't feel the same frustration for people who are the Second Amendment sanctity people the way I have for Rachel Maddow, but it does bother me because it seems to be like a psychological obstinance. It seems to be like this psychological firewall that people have in their head where it's almost like, yeah, they just want to prove that, or they especially want to say it out loud so everybody else knows, oh, okay, you're one of us. You're not some liberal commie, and that's what I see. And because of that, it makes it easy for these people, and I'd hate to say it, but I'm almost certain there's going to be another mass shooting this year or next year again in this country for sure. It's bound.
Sure, but that is part of human life.
No.
I think people are killing people, and that is how it is for 3,000 years now, and that will continue. I mean, there's no way around it. The question is, are the number of shootings any kind of warning signal? But not that the fact that people are shooting people. That is a normal human thing.
Yeah, the thing is that you could really minimize this. You could minimize like the body counts from like, well, look what happened in Muenster. You're right. And then, wow, the fact that you pointed out that the guy in Muenster who drove his car into that crowd, into that pub, actually had an AK-47 in the house, and yet he didn't use the AK-47, he used the car. That's, wow, I don't know how to wrap my head around that. I'm curious. I'm surprised I haven't seen more of that in the news, like somebody trying to make an argument about that.
Yeah, he had a handgun. He took the handgun with to the attack. Then he used the handgun to shoot himself, and he had an AK-47 at home. And this gun is strictly forbidden in Germany. There is no way you can purchase such a thing legally. Yeah, that is somewhere from Ukraine, I think. And yeah.
No, this MC made a good point. It isn't a right if you have to get government permission or approval. Yeah, okay, if you're going to get into the cement, that's why, look, for me, I don't really care about it being a right or a privilege. It's, okay, and let me not get too excited, because that's when you start losing the arguments, I guess. But that's my point. There's a certain sanctimony that people are giving the Second Amendment that's getting people killed. I guess, I don't know, maybe that's the easiest way I could describe it right now. And we could really lower the body count. We could really lower the incidences of this happening if you simply had that, for example, that one regulation where you have to get a license in order to own a gun. You have to take a course, you know, and then in that process of you taking that course, they can tell what you're buying this gun for. If you're a real, you know, if you're going to be a law-abiding citizen, or are you out to do harm? And even for people, you know, even if you can philosophically be correct about that, if it isn't a right to, if you have to get government permission, well, then fuck that shit. When it comes to something like this, products, you know, things that are guns that they're specifically designed to murder people. And then the assault rifle category, which is designed to kill as many people as quickly as possible. You got to be careful with that shit. You can't just let that just flood into society, dude. And it's more than just drugs, because a lot of people, oh, what about the prohibition of drugs? You're comparing apples with oranges. A joint, or even or cocaine, they're not, when drug dealers sell their drugs, they want you to be a return customer. They don't want to just kill you either. You know what I mean? And it's not, and I get it. Gun manufacturers want their gun owners to be repeat customers as well. But let's face it, that thing that you are selling is designed to murder other people, to take away other people's right to live. And I just don't, maybe I should invite MC into it, you know.
I think you should, because he's a weapons expert, and I would like to hear his opinion, because when it comes to weapons, he really knows what he's talking about. So yeah,
well,
you should probably invite him.
Without turning this into a clusterfuck here, I'm going to send one to MC, an invite via Twitter.
No, but I think, I mean, you touched a lot of topics. I think the Second Amendment is one thing that need to be discussed, and another thing is like the idea of self-defense and so on. Then these, in my opinion, these are completely different topics. Yeah, in my opinion, the Second Amendment is a nice idea. I get the idea, but it's not really working, or it's not working the way it is handled in the United States. Because if you want to really follow this path, then you must allow that people can buy tanks and nukes and whatever, because the government has these weapons too. So yeah, so either you go this path, or you say, yeah, that is it's not really working. Hi MC, how is it going?
What's up, man?
Hey everybody.
Hey.
I'm sorry if my voice is a little sore from yelling a couple of nights ago, and then I actually did a quick little rant earlier today on the Washington Post. So my voice is a little scratchy. I apologize. And no, I can't type with shit, which is why sometimes it comes out with riggy instead of right.
No, that's cool. That's it. So no, feel free, man. Because now I'm going over your comments. But go ahead.
The thing that you're doing, Nachi, is you're making an assumption. You're saying that if you didn't have these guns, therefore there wouldn't be these incidents wouldn't be happening. But you have no real proof of that. In fact,
can I stop you really quick? I'm not saying that if we didn't have these guns, because I'm not talking about banning guns. I'm saying if you reduced the access, if you didn't make it so easy for people to acquire these guns, you wouldn't have the Nicholas Cruzes getting them. And granted,
I hear what you're saying. Okay. However, you have no evidence of that.
Yeah, but
I understand your
MC, sorry, MC, but that is not an argument, because that is exactly the same.
Hold on a second. It is an argument because this.
You have no proof. I mean,
Torsten, it is an argument, and let me tell you why. Because you're telling people, I'm going to take away your rights. I'm going to take away from law-abiding citizens. I'm taking something away from you. And you should have evidence. If you're going to sit up there and impinge upon other people's rights, you should have evidence to say this is why we're doing it, not because I feel for
it. The evidence would be plain and simply just look at any country where guns are, and believe me, I'm going to keep stressing this. My point is not to ban guns, but go to any country where the guns are banned. You do not have the mass shootings with the frequency that we have in this country, dude.
Really? Have you taken a look at?
Yeah, but that is only.
Have you taken a look at Mexico lately?
Yeah, and that is only a correlation, but not a causation.
Hold on, no, I understand. So he asked the question. All right. Have you taken a look at Europe and compare the mass shootings that happen throughout all of Europe? Because that's a better comparison to the United States.
We don't have mass shootings in Europe.
Yes, you do. You have mass shootings in France.
No,
You've had mass shootings.
Sorry, MC, we don't.
You do have mass shootings all over the place. You've had 2 in France last year, and you're going to say that you don't have them?
No, we don't. Sorry.
Oh, they didn't happen? They weren't reported?
But again, those mass shootings were not. No, and we can go with the one in Norway, which that one continues to be used as like the example. But it hasn't happened again in Norway since that happened.
Yeah, but Norway isn't the United States.
But you're asking me for that evidence.
No. But I'm saying that okay, you're comparing apples to oranges though, and this is why I said you have to compare the United States to all of Europe. At least it's a little bit closer with the number of and the different demographics across cultural lines that we have in the United States. To compare the United States to a specific country, even if it was Switzerland, where they have mandated machine guns, all right, given to people that just go through their military process, and they have to maintain it because they're basically in their reserves forever. All right.
That is correct. Yeah.
All right. So you can't compare the United States. When you take a look at a comparison to the United States, then let's talk about some similar size and some similar cultural differentials. All right. When you're going to do a comparison. So if you have to take Europe into account, if you're going to do that, you can't look at a specific country like that. Even if you try to attempt, for example, to compare the United States to China. All right. It's not a fair comparison when you're talking about our society and where our society is. Now,
let me stop you for a second. Mm-hmm. It's then that also applies to when you're bringing up Mexico, because with Mexico, it's a different thing.
I brought up Mexico only because you said, give me an example.
No, but in Mexico, I'm not reading about children who are shooting up their own classmates with guns that they legally purchased.
It's all illegal cartel stuff that they're going around killing people. And when you talk about quote unquote kids, all right, in Mexico, many of the people dying and many of the people shooting, right, are what we would consider quote unquote kids in the United States, which I hate that term. I really do. When you're talking about young adults and you call them kids, all right, because I think that's a large part of the problem. But the other aspect of this is let's take a look at the situations recently, okay? Especially the two big ones in Florida, right? In both incidents, okay, you have the cops not doing their jobs. After the fact, people said they didn't do their job, but why weren't they doing their jobs to start with? There was no reason for this. You say that this guy had no reason for having a gun. My question was why wasn't he in jail already? There was plenty of evidence to put him in jail. There was plenty of evidence that would have literally stopped him without impinging upon anybody else's rights to have a gun, all right, that could have prevented these kind of tragedies. The reason these tragedies are happening is because of things that are going on within our social structure, not because of the accessibility of weapons. That's not why this is happening.
It's both. There's clearly an issue with, because here's another weird thing that I'm starting to see in the news: how many have been thwarted since Parkland. There was no, just really quick. Let me just to finish off this point. I would agree that there is a mental health issue with certain kids or certain teenagers, whatever term you want to use, teenagers that are still in high school that think this is actually like a viable option in their heads. They actually think it's a form of power or something like that.
Oh, okay, but that's not my point. My point isn't that there are people that are mentally deranged. All right, we know there are people that are mentally deranged. The problem is our society doesn't want the cops to sit up there and actually act on that kind of information until after the fact.
But again, with the ease and accessibility, you're making it that much more difficult. If
you increase the cops having to go in there and try and police guns at a higher level, you're now even further making it giving them more chores to do on a wider range, on a broader range of the populace. It's going to have a negative impact on their ability to actually go in there and focus on what's important. And now we also got to look at the fact of why aren't they focusing on what's important? Why aren't they focusing on getting these guys and putting them in jail and taking care of these situations? A lot of it's because in our society, there are people going, well, he's just a little bit bad, but it should be okay. We'll just let it go. That's where these things are happening. And then you also take a look at the other aspect in our society where you came up with a philosophy of saying, oh, these are protected zones. Look, we have a little sign that says this is a gun-free zone.
And I agree with that too. I agree that it's probably not a good idea to be saying gun-free zones.
So before we get to the point where we're telling citizens, you have to jump through hoops. You're a law-abiding citizen, but you have to do these things. And before you get to that point, why don't you say, okay, let's fix these other things first, and let's see whether or not we can lower these kind of things from happening. Let's try and fix what's really broken. This is my opinion, granted. All right, not accessibility to guns, because gun accessibility isn't the issue. And then it comes to the final thing. The whole purpose of the Second Amendment, and this is why people hold it sacrosanct, right, is the acknowledgement that if you let the government, all right, become the approval authority to say who can have a gun and who can't have a gun, if you're leaving it up to somebody else, then the tyrannical nature of all governments will take to the fore and they will strip those rights. They've done it every single time they got that power. Every time that power has happened, they've banned guns.
Yeah, but your own government is stripping your rights for decades now, more and more and more. And you have guns, and you are not going.
Torsten, that's not an excuse. Just because people are letting their rights go, and I've been against this for a long time, okay, and I've argued against a lot of this stuff for a long time. Just because people are ignoring it doesn't mean that say, well, we'll just continue the practice. It's not a good idea. At some point, you've got to put a stop.
Yeah, but sorry, I agree with some things you said, and no doubt. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, that, in my opinion, that is a total joke. Because for the first argument is that nobody shows up at your apartment with a like heavily gunned. They would come to you and say like, yeah, please join us, and we have some questions and so on. And then they take you into custody, and that is it. So you don't have even the chance to use your weapons to defend yourself. That is the first point. And the second point is...
That hasn't happened anywhere in the United States, is what you're saying.
That happens in the United States every day, 1,000 times. That policemen knock on your door and say, follow me.
Yeah.
That happens in every nation.
And some people follow them. And there's also incidents where they knock on the door or bash down a door because they've got the wrong writ. and a gunfight ensues. That happens in the United States as well.
Yeah, bad enough.
That's not bad. That's just reality.
That people shoot each other because of a mistake, that is not
It's not
bad.
a good thing that there was a mistake, but it shows you where you want to try and figure out ways to make that mistake. But who made the mistake? The police.
But that is not the point. The whole idea
no, it is the point.
That people should de-escalate and not escalate everything.
Once again, the person who is the people who are causing an escalation, and I agree with you about that. One thing that people in the United States do not realize about the police, all right, or I shouldn't say not realize, but one of the problems with the police is the police oftentimes do not de-escalate a situation where they need to. But if they're the ones coming into it, it's their responsibility to keep it de-escalated.
Just a second, MC. It is not only the police. I mean, that is embedded in the American mentality. Nobody is de-escalating. Nobody.
No, there's aspects of that, and you're right about that too. But how are you going to get people to de-escale?
That is an interesting question.
Let me tell you something, Torsten. That ship sailed in the 70s.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Okay. That ship where people said, well, I'm going to sit up there and try and de-escalate, or I'm just going to listen to the police. I'll let them arrest me and be taken into custody, and then I'll sit up there and fight in court, right? Which is a rational point of view in my mind. All right. Because like it or not, people are not necessarily afraid that the police are going to come into their homes and just kill them. Now, unfortunately, in the 1970s, there was a big frickin' sea change for a lot of reasons, all right, where there are communities now. There's African-American communities that'll tell you right now that the police, every time the police come and knock on the door, that they're there to beat up a black person. They really believe that. Even if it's not true, it's what they believe.
Now, can I tell you really quick? This is why I don't like having too many people on because we start talking over each other. But just what you're saying right now, I want to use that not against you, but just to prove a point. The fact that you,
I'm not going to be offended by anything, so don't worry about it.
The point is, just like I agree with you that there's that left-wing conspiracy theory that they push onto black people that they're all out to catch you and kill you. You yourself were basically making a point before, which I didn't get a chance to address it, when you were like, if we give government the right to do that, they always take over, like tyrannical and everything you were saying. Dude, we just had between 1994 and 2004, there was the federal assault weapons ban, and it was lifted. It was expired. So this notion that the moment you give government one chance at regulating something, that now everything's going to be taken away and it's going to be a domino effect is not true. There's that evidence. The federal assault weapons ban, which is only 10 years, and it expired in 2004.
Yeah, but
additionally, hold
on a second. Hold on a second. That is one of the few laws that was put on the books. That was a sunset law. That was a requirement to say, okay, we're going to just do this temporarily to see if there's a lessening of things, all right? Because it wasn't going to get approval anywhere else. It was a watering down within the legislation. Okay. Granted, all right, they weren't able to continue it. There was an attempt to continue it, all right? And this is one of the few times that our legislative process actually did and worked the way that that it should for the country. However, during that same time frame, Nachi, you're ignoring the number of times, all right, that people had to take their rights to court, all right, to the Supreme Court to get these bans removed, including during the same time frame where the Washington D.C. courts, right, or the Washington D.C. councils had banned all handguns from people owning handguns. And that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then what happened as soon as they issued that saying you can't limit people is they put in another one. They just changed a word or two so it could go through and clog up the court systems more. To say that the governments will not do this, it's the evidence is all around you. Take a look at what they did in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, they actually tried to arrest the Secret Service, all right, George W. Bush was going through there, right? They actually tried to arrest the Secret Service because they were violating their handgun rules, right? These are things that happen. Now you got the president's Secret Service, and they were trying to make an issue of this. To say that governments, and it's not just the federal government. When I say the government, this is the thing about the United States that's very different than things. Is we have three forms of government. You've got local or municipality. You've got state, which states have a lot of power if they choose to utilize it, right? And then you've got the federal government. If you're going to try and work on some of these issues, all right, and you try to do it at a local level and it doesn't work, well, then we're going to try it at a state level and it doesn't work. And then you're going to try it at a federal level where okay, now we're going to impact everybody. Why would I expect it to work now? The handgun issue didn't fix DC. The handgun ban, while it was in effect, didn't lower crime. All right. The same handgun issue that they had, because when that got overturned, they also overturned a very similar one that was in New York City for the same reason. All right. So you can't sit up there and take a look and say that the government's tendencies is not to sit up there and go toward tyrannies, because that's what governments do, is they go toward tyrannies. That's why bureaucracies grow and grow and grow.
Granted, I get that, but I guess, look, this is the only point I'm going to make, and I don't know, I just feel like, yeah, after this point, maybe I don't have the powers of persuasion that I thought I had. The point I'm trying to make is I do not see the harm in, and it's not that I don't see the harm. I think this will work I trip over my own words. If we if people had to be able to get a license in order to get a gun, and you had to take at least a course, and you had like a 30-day waiting period for that gun, I'm certain, and granted, this I can only make a bet on this. I am willing to bet that the frequency of these mass shootings would reduce, and probably not even reduce. I would even go so far as to say that they would probably stop, and that's pretty much the point that I'm trying to make. You know,
I think
sensible thing, which would just be the licensing, and you're not taking away people's rights.
Well, you are, because if you tell people that they have to get licensed, you're leaving it up to the government authority to sit up there and determine whether or not you have this. And now it's up to a bureaucrat, or it's up to the government to give you the approval to sit up there and own a gun or not. And that's not right.
I get that concern, dude. I totally understand it, man. But
take a look, for example, once the law was passed, all right, or once the handgun bill was overturned, what did Massachusetts do? Well, basically, they said, well, if you want to carry concealed, you can do it. And then they just deny everybody for their concealed carry permits, unless they determine you have a quote unquote need for the concealed carry. All right. Which means unless you're a security guard or a policeman, you have no recourse to get a concealed carry permit in Massachusetts or New York. This is happening today. All right. So to say that this is common sense, when you take a look at these other aspects and these other areas that are frankly abusing their citizens, all right, in any way, type, shape, or form, because their attitude, the people's attitude that are running this thing, the Parkland students and their minders, the ones that are quote unquote pushing them to as shields so that they can protect themselves and hide behind children, the freaking cowards that they are. All right, they want to ban guns. They want a total ban on guns because they want that power. It's no more simple than that.
I don't think everybody who wants to ban guns altogether is out to be a communist totalitarian. I think that there's just some people that either haven't given it enough thought, or they look at it in such dramatic terms. And I think that's also part of the reason why we got so many problems in society. I mean, it's very difficult for people to at least try to see the gradients. You know, I hate using the word nuance, so I'm going to go with gradient. The gradient between the two extremes. And I'm pretty sure you would agree with me. I mean, there's a reason why we don't allow people to have nuclear weapons as well.
Oh, okay. The Second Amendment is there to prevent a governmental tyranny. All right. And what does that mean? That means the government stepping on individual rights. All right. So basically what you're given is the individual the ability to defend themselves. If you've got a nuke, it has nothing to do with the individual ability to defend yourself. All right.
The Second Amendment is not about the individual; it's about militias.
No,
So
it's not about militias at all. It's about individual. It's about individual rights. All right, and protecting those individual rights. All right. And so when you hear these things, you have somebody saying, "Well, this is what it's about." Our founding documents don't just include the Second Amendment. All right. It also includes a lot of back and forth as they were discussing the issues and where they were coming down on these issues. All right, and how they were seeing it at the time. This is why the Federalist Papers are so important, and it's very clear if you read any of the Federalist Papers. All right, on back and forth, what the intent was for allowing individuals to have guns. It was not because of a militia.
But the law says,
once again,
the law talks about armed militia.
The law mentions militias and says the individual rights shall not be infringed upon. If you're going to go to the stickler of the law, then you've got to read it as the stickler of the law, not try and parse things. And then what you should be doing is saying, okay, what does this actually mean? Because to be honest, one of the problems with anything that you put in a legal structure, as soon as you write it down, over time, the language changes. The meaning, the context in which something is written.
Yeah, but a militia is a group of people and not an individual. And that has not changed in the last 200 years.
But the word individual hasn't changed in 200 years either. And it says the individual's right to bear arms will not be infringed.
Yeah, this is where I don't really care. For me, it feels like a semantic shell game when we start getting into that. I'm for sure not arguing for banning guns or keeping people from owning guns. I would think that you would agree with me, though, that there are certain people, and everybody in the comments here would also probably agree that there are certain people that should not have their hands on guns, namely the mentally ill.
Well,
people
we have a Justice Department, we have a judicial branch, and we've got an executive branch. All right, that is supposed to police those situations. The problem is those situations aren't being policed, Nachi. Not the fact that these things are happening. It's that it's not being policed to prevent that.
I think it's. I don't think it's
how do you want to police it? I mean, you go to the police and say, I think that MC is mentally retarded
Torsten.
and he shouldn't have a gun. And then they come to your house and look if you have guns.
Here's what I mean by that, Torsten. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. When people issue credible threats, meaning if you are standing there in a YouTube video and you're saying, I'm going to be the next school shooter and you've got a gun, all right, then yes, the police should be taking action. What's more is that if the police have been called to your house because this individual was literally threatening people with a gun, the police should be taking action.
Sure, I totally agree.
Okay, yeah. and that didn't, and it led to Parkland because the police ignored it.
All right, fair enough. But again,
you can take a look at the same. Hold on, you can take a look at the same thing.
Wait a second. Let me ask a question.
All right,
I get that, and I agree. But where do you draw the line? I mean, do you have to stand on YouTube and say I'm going to shoot some people, or is it that when you just have some hate speech and that is already enough? Where do you draw the line?
I draw the line in an investigation. The police have to do their jobs to investigate. It's still an investigation. The police, however, can't just turn a blind eye to this because they say, well, in our investigation, we figured, we weren't really sure because we let it go. The same thing happened with the Orlando shooter. He was well known by the FBI. All right. They knew about him.
I would agree. There's definitely a problem where the FBI and the police and local authorities are dropping the ball. But we're giving them too many balls to juggle, is my point. When you have...
But your solution, Nachi, I'm sorry for interrupting, but your solution, I can't understand how you don't think giving them another ball, which is what you're suggesting, all right, to drop, all right, is going to fix this.
No, you're not. No, you're not going to... That is something that, for example, the gun shop owners that sold the gun to Nicholas Cruz, which I remember reading an article on those people. They closed down their stores. They want nothing to do with this. And amazingly enough, the media has not made their lives a living hell. You don't know about those people.
Well, because they got a lot of support. One thing that I think, an impression that I think you have, which is not true or inaccurate, is how much money the NRA gets from gun manufacturers. It's a drop in the bucket for what the NRA gets from its membership.
Well,
right? And that membership is willingly given in that. And if you compare, if you're going to take
do you actually have numbers? Do you know the numbers? What?
I at one time I did, because one time I was an NRA member. Now I stopped being an NRA member.
Spends literally millions. They spend millions on lobby.
Hold on. They spent approximately, what is it, 20 million, or I think. Yeah, I think it's 20 million over 10 years.
Oh,
right?
Maybe over 10 years, but dude, during the 2016 election, they were spending millions of dollars.
Oh yeah,
but
if you compare that, take a look at what the NRA spent and compare it to what the labor union spent, or the ACLU for that matter. It's not even close. The reason the NRA has a lot of power, all right, is because, which is different nowadays. It's the same thing that the reason unions used to have power. Now, the reasons unions have power now is not the same reason that unions had power back in the 60s. Unions in the 60s had a lot of power because they would let their quote unquote individual members know about situations that they concerned themselves with. They said, "Hey, we're voting on this. Take a look at what this guy's doing." They were informing the membership, all right, trying to convince them, all right, to vote a specific way. And it was very, very effective. The NRA does the exact same thing. The problem is I mean, the NRA has close to 20 million people, all right? There are almost 20 million people in at least from the latest thing that I looked at in Google, all right, in their roles. Now, that doesn't include the massive roles that the massive increase due to people like Mr. Hogg, all right, who then called them out to attack them. All right. Now, there's one thing to call people out and say, look, we need to have a reasonable gun legislation. It's another thing to accuse people of being murderers because they're NRA members.
No, granted, yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting again, Nachi, but the reason that's happening is because the discourse in the country, that ship sailed in the 1970s.
And do you think that guns can fix it?
I don't think guns are the problem. Okay,
yeah, that's already, I think, part of the problem. That's why we're having this major discussion. I wouldn't say that they're the only part of the problem, but it's in the term mass shootings. Guns are inextricably tied to this. But sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, so if you have mass bombings, would you prefer that?
But that's not what's going on. What's going on are mass shootings.
But that was going on at one point. All right, society, as much as crazy as the social situation is now that you and I see, as you look at it, right? It's nothing compared to what it was like in the 70s, and in the late 60s, early 70s. You want to talk about riots? All right, I'm going to be real blunt. They would have looked at what happened at Berkeley. That wasn't even considered a riot back then. All right, a riot meant buildings were blown up and set on fire. Okay, and that was happening in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a bombing campaign across the United States where you were having a bomb go off in several different areas of the United States almost once a week.
And,
all right, so yeah, and now granted, bombs are difficult to manage correctly. All right, they're not the easiest things to deal with.
But that are different things, MC. I mean, that is the point. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, they had some very good reasons to protest and to riot, and
they had a lot of made up reasons.
Wait a second.
Right,
And having a reason for a riot and a shooting from a mentally retarded at some school buildings, or that Vegas shooting or something, has nothing to do with political ideology or anything. That is just mentally retarded people who go nuts, and that is
Okay.
it. That's a different story.
We don't know what happened with the Vegas shooting. All right, so I personally we can't talk about that issue. All right, we can't. Okay. Now, if you want to talk about the mental retarded issue, all right, that was going on in Sandy Hook. Once again, you had an incident where the perp was known by the police. Okay, he shouldn't have had access to those weapons. The weapons weren't his. He didn't purchase them. All right, but he did. Okay.
Exactly, because it is.
Hold on.
That is Nachi's whole point. Because
but if
he had these guns because it is so easy to get.
But hold on. If you're expecting the general populace to be involved in policing this action, which is what you're suggesting, Nachi suggested when he stood up there and said that it would be up to the gun the manufacturers, the gun stores, the owners of the gun stores, to police this, then why is it that you don't expect individual citizens in this regard to have done that?
No, I would expect responsibility on everybody. But again, if, for example, if there was not just a universal background check to check for the criminality, if there was some sort of mental health assessment, and granted, you don't want to go that deep. You don't want to make it that impossible like the way they do it in New York. Again, I think it's just a matter of balance, finding that right balance.
Well, a balance would be nice, but the reality is that the United States doesn't work that way. Have you ever noticed that?
Well, that's part of it.
Throughout our history, all right, I mean, regardless of what the subject is, and we're talking about gun control in this case, but if you take a look at American history, we fluctuate from extreme to extreme.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Okay, well, but that's the United States. That's how we've always been structured.
No,
I don't see it.
Disagree, dude. Because it's been happening, and just by the way, and sorry that I'm cutting you off. Go ahead, finish. You finish what you're going to say.
No.
But my point is, just because it's been happening that way, doesn't mean it needs to continue happening that way. And it's also, now my wife's starting to jump. She's in the background. She's like, exactly. The point is that how do you call it? And that's part of what my channel is about. This is why I bother doing this. I would love to be able.
If you want to, I agree that what you're saying, Nachi. But if you want to change that, then what you have to do is change society. You have to focus on what is actually going to change society. Banning any specific item doesn't actually change society.
No, I would agree. I would say educating people or putting out accurate information or having a dialogue like this hopefully adds to it. Because I myself, look, I'll be honest, to a large degree, I also wonder to what extent is the usefulness of these live streams. Because I think a lot of times it's either an echo chamber or it's guys just arguing, but nothing ever really rises. I don't know how much of this rises to the legislative level where let's solve it. Because I'm aside from trying to sell my t-shirts, just really quick, aside from trying to sell my t-shirts and hawk my wares and just being creative, because I love making these videos, I really would like to see some effective positive change come about it. I don't want to just,
Okay, but if you want that, all right, sit back. Right, you're going to have to wait and be patient because that's in order for a video to have an effect from a legislative standpoint. In order for it to get in there, it's got to get into the consciousness of the people. It's got to get broad-based things. All right, the discussions that we're having, believe it or not, these discussions are replacing something that we lost in the United States since about the 1950s, right? And that is the community discussions, where people would go together in local communities and they would discuss these issues on a local level, where people would go to the town hall meetings and constantly have town hall meetings. They were always far more well attended. Well, there's a lot of reasons that doesn't happen. One of which, of course, is that when you talk about urban areas, All right, there's just too many people. You can't have local kind of dialogue. So the fact that we now have a platform and a medium in which to do this is a good thing. But in order for these things to take place, in order for you to see any kind of sea change going forward, right, it's going to take time. I mean, some of the comments that I was making today, and I'm sorry for hogging up all the airtime here, but one of the comments that I made earlier in the chat was, I tried to you made the comment that these militarized weapons, that you're outgunned when you have an AR-15 against a handgun, which is not accurate. All right, because it's situationally dependent. All right, if you have two people standing 100 yards away from one another, then yes, okay, yeah, obviously the AR-15 has more potential there. All right, but when you're talking about a mass shooter incident, all right, in a closed-in area, all right, like a school, all right, the AR-15 actually is at a disadvantage to a handgun. If for no other reason, the speed of reloading, all right, for a handgun is far faster, all right, than it is for an AR-15. So as long as you're not dealing with a distance environment and you're dealing with an area where you've got multiple areas to hide in, which is shooting around corners and everything else, because that's how schools are. All right, an AR-15 isn't a better choice. All right, it just simply isn't, especially considering the round and what the round's ballistics are like. All right, so that is a very specific situation. All right, the opposite, of course, is going to be true in a situation where you're dealing with when you're talking about, for example, Las Vegas, right, where a heavy rifle, all right, was far superior to that. Now, the AR-15 is still not the best. There are better weapons that could have been used if you really wanted to create more casualties, and I don't want to go into that. All right, that would have done a far better job. And if the guy was truly, and I'm assuming that the guy is the one who killed him and everything, but who it was this one guy, whatever his name was, I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now, that everyone blames for this. And at this point in time, I have no reason to doubt that. But if he was really trained well, even with a modicum of training, right, the fact that he only killed 50, and that's a horrible number, I know, but the fact he only killed 50 is amazing to me. Because if he had the right kind of training in any way, shape, or form, or knew anything about real ballistics and how things work, he wouldn't have chose those weapons, and he wouldn't have chosen that position. He would have chosen a different one.
Okay, but you know what you're doing? You're almost making a case for banning all guns. Because when I hear people talk about, look, a handgun would have been worse, people like Nancy Pelosi and fucking all these other, they'll be like, you know what? Then let's just ban it all. And that's not at all what I fucking wanted to.
Well, I'm trying to provide accurate context. Okay, I'm trying. I understand that the way you look at it, you see, well, this is making the case for it. Well, you can look at it that way, but you're ignoring all the other things that we discussed that I tried to bring up as well. But I'm not gonna lie about the conception of how these things work. But the reason I bring this up is if you ban all guns, right, you will drive these people underground. You will you're going to make it harder for the police to actually find them, and you're going to make their police work. You're going to add to their police work levels. But at a time period,
then you shouldn't ban drugs anymore, because that is driving the people underground as well. The same argument would work in that way too.
You're not going to get an argument with me from a federal ban on drugs, because I think that there should be a reined in of the federal government there as well. I truly believe in changing society, but there are things to change society that can work. All right. And I've said this before, banning a substance doesn't change society, but getting the government off of your back will, whether it's doing investigation or giving them the power to try and regulate every little thing so that law abiding citizens are impacted on a daily basis without even realizing how much the impact is.
Wait, actually, let me ask you this, MC. What would you think would be, I know that there's no clear-cut solution, there's always going to be things like this, but to dramatically reduce the number of these mass shootings, do you have any ideas of what would you do? What did you take?
When you talk about mass shootings, let's talk. If you don't mind, I want to more further narrow it down. All right, because I want to take it to just the school shootings. Let's talk about doing something that's going to create or that would have an effect to lessen or to a large extent mass shootings in schools. Let's look at it from that narrow perspective. The reason is because the solution for that I would give, for example, with Las Vegas versus what I'll give for schools are going to be slightly different. Okay, in schools, the biggest problem with schools now that are creating these situations, in my opinion, is these gun-free zones. The fact that you are that, and one more thing, calling teenagers kids. They're not kids. They're young adults. And the fact that we keep treating them as if they're no more than 2, all right, throughout our entire society, as we call them children, rather than what they actually are, adults, is getting them to act and not sit up there and modify their own viewpoint of the world. They're not growing up. There remain too many of them, not all of them. All right, this doesn't affect every individual. In fact, it doesn't affect the majority of the individuals. But it isn't a majority of the individuals shooting up these schools either.
As long as you can't decide what beverage you drink, you are not an adult, in my opinion. As long as you can't decide that, you're a kid. If you can't decide to drink a beer in public, then you're a kid. That is it. End of story.
You're not
these kids shouldn't have weapons.
I've disagreed with the drinking age in the United States as well. Okay, so my point goes back to we're treating these these teenagers as if they're kids all the way through the point where they turn 18 and go to college, and then all of a sudden we're expecting them to act like reasonable adults, which is not what's happening. It's because they're being treated as kids that's increasing school shootings. This is one of the things that I see. That, and the fact that you're creating gun-free zones, which are basically put up a big pop-up target and say, here's the best place to do as much damage as possible.
Yeah, I thoroughly disagree that those are the two solutions. I find to take away the gun-free, the gun-free thing, fine, but that thing, it's almost.
Well, let me ask you a question, Nachi, about that. Why not try it first? It's something that's simple to do.
But try what? What are you going to be trying?
Removing schools from being gun-free zones.
Okay, fine. You could do that. That one maybe I would agree. That's something measurable. But the other one about treating kids as
you asked what I was thinking.
Granted. And I'm just telling you that's why I think we continue having this. And again, I don't know how else to say this, and I know you're not going to take it as an offense, but I think that mentality and I'm going to, fine, if it sounds like I'm judging you, that almost right-wing mentality, which bothers me as much as the left-wing social justice one, that right-wing mentality of the Second Amendment is not to be touched at all, and everyone
okay. I understand your view. Here, show me, all right. I think I'm fairly rational, right? Mm-hmm. I think I'm fairly reasonable. Show me how this is going to fix it. I've asked this repeatedly.
Okay, no, show you how it would fix it. What?
Give me an example where it's been tried and it's worked.
What? Making sure that people have a license and you don't have this level of mass shootings.
Show me where it has worked.
Well, in comparison here within the United States, New York City, I don't think within New York State we've seen these mass shootings the way we've seen them, let's say, in school shootings, if you want to be specific with school shootings.
Well,
you don't see it the way we've seen that here, let's say in Florida or in other states.
Okay, that's true, but what's different about the schools in New York City, right, versus the schools in Dade County or Broward County?
Well, there, I don't know. I can't tell you right now off the top of my head. Do you know?
Okay. Well, the one thing is that the police enforcement is totally different. All right. Don't just let people, threaten somebody with a gun and then let them wander around. Another thing is that all those schools in New York City, for the most part, have metal detectors going through these things. So to say that you're comparing apples to apples again, all right? Each region, of course, in the United States is going to be different. This is why you end up with clusters, to be honest. This is why you'll see school shootings in certain areas, but you don't see them across the board. When was the last time there was a mass school shooting in, say, I don't know, Idaho or Nebraska or North Dakota?
Granted, right? You might have there might be cultural reasons or factors for that. There might be a number of other things, but I think it's pretty safe to say, again, and I know it must sound like a broken record, that ease and accessibility with which people, even teenagers, can get their hands on guns, and especially guns like assault rifles. Right. That's what's driving this, and that's what I'm pretty sure before the end of this year there'll be another one.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Can a teenager, all right, an 18-year-old, someone that's not an adult, can they walk into a gun store and purchase a gun?
It depends where. I thought that you can't just walk into a gun store and just buy one. No, apparently there's a waiting period. I think even Nicholas Cruz went through his little waiting period. I think it was 3 days.
Well, Nicholas Cruz was how old?
Oh, and it was 18 to top it off.
Okay, so he was an adult. So we're not talking about children having access to guns, according to your definition, right?
Yeah, I mean, okay, good.
All right. Now that doesn't explain Columbine. Granted, that doesn't explain Columbine, but you can't, as a teenager, as a 17-year-old and below, you cannot purchase a firearm in the United States. You can't. It's illegal, and there's not a state in the country where you can sit up there and if you're 17, under 18 years old, you can purchase a firearm. And in every state in the every state in the union, it's illegal for you to purchase a handgun if you're not 21. That's the current rules right now. If you're a 19-year-old and you try to walk into the local gun store, or everyone keeps talking about Walmart, so I'm just going to use them. I don't know if Walmart, what Walmart has for weaponries. I would never go to Walmart to buy a weapon. You can't sit up there and purchase it. And in fact, most states, now this is still true, in most states you can't even purchase the ammo for a handgun. So if a round is dual use, like a 44 cartridge, where you have 44s that can be used in lever action rifles, but they can also be that same round can be used in a 44 handgun, you can't even purchase that round. All right. So to say that these gun rules, that we don't have gun rules already in place, belies the fact that there are gun rules, and they are commonsensical rules. The access that you're talking about with these quote unquote children is a lot more minimal than you think it is. And if you take a look, for example, of what happened at Sandy Hook, you had another adult committing these crimes. It isn't children killing children all that often. It's adults targeting children. If you want to look at it from the starkest point of view here. All right, with the one exception being Columbine. And in Columbine, when Columbine happened, all right, these were kids who did get access. These were, as you term them, children who did get access to weapons. All right, but was it legal for them to sit up there and purchase those weapons? No, it was not. So laws were already being broken, and these are laws that are on the books, all right, throughout the country. Were already being broken. These are laws that were supposed to already be being policed by the police, and they still got access to those weapons. All right, to ban the weapon. All right, how is that going to work? To come back and expect the United States, especially in our country, to ban any weapon. All right, it's not going to change the availability as it already exists or going forward.
That's why I'm not talking about banning guns. I'm just talking about making it, just putting one extra barrier, and a sensible one at that, so it's not that easy for just anyone to buy these guns.
But that's, those barriers already exist in most cases. The barriers that you're talking about, the barriers to,
because this guy Nicholas Cruz was able to get those guns, despite being already of legal age, quote unquote. And remember, he couldn't buy a handgun. A handgun he couldn't buy alcohol, but he could buy these. He could buy this.
Well, but that's because we've gone nuts in this nation. Remember when I was telling you about we go to extremes? We went to the extremes when it came to alcohol. We've done it repeatedly, actually. All right. I was never for raising the drinking age. All right. I've been a proponent of getting especially from a federal perspective, right, getting the federal government out of a lot of things. And I think because the viewpoint and the way the American structure is, the way our society is structured, or the government is structured, a lot of the problems that we have from a social context has to do with power within the federal government, because it's led to a lot of bad ideas getting into people's head, including mine. One big watershed moment for me was 9/11. Right? Why? Because I looked at it and I said, okay, what would I have done if I was on that plane? And the reality was, I would have done what everyone else did on those, if I'd been on one of those planes at that time. And yet, there was no reason, if people would have stood up and taken action individually, there was no reason for any of those planes to have hit or killed any of those people. Why? Because these were people who basically walked in with box cutters. Why didn't people stop them? They had the ability to stop them. I've got a box cutter. Okay, I've got a freaking laptop. There's plenty of laptops. There's a lot of ways they could have stopped those perpetrators from doing it. Why didn't they? Because they had gotten complacent. As a society, we had gotten complacent. We sat back, all right, and said, okay, in this situation, they're not thinking about being flown into a building. They're thinking about, well, I'm going to have a trip to Cuba, or I'm being hijacked to somewhere else. Most likely nothing's going to matter. I mean, after all, he's just got a box cutter, right? Because people had gotten used to the fact to let somebody else be primarily responsible for their safeties in these situations. Nowadays,
I would agree with that too. I'd agree with that too. But
nowadays, in a plane, this is one of the reasons why I disagree with the federal banning of box cutters on planes. Why? Because if somebody tried to jump up on a plane today and said, Allah Akbar, or down with the white race, or I'm going to kill all the blacks that are on this plane, that person's going to get beaten. All right, they're not going to get to the cockpit. All right, they're going to be beaten by the passengers on the plane because they're not going to tolerate it. When we become too complacent as a society, all right, in various different areas, all right, that's when a lot of these things happen. But this is how Americans are. And one of the reasons why we're this way, one of the reasons why you end up with such a wide swings, Nachi, right? Because I mentioned the swings and you agree that they're happening. One of the reasons is because we don't have a single society per se. All right, we have a lot of cultures and subcultures through that are all intermingled within the United States. You have regional subcultures, you've got personal subcultures, you've got ethnic subcultures, all right, all throughout the United States. Almost no other nation in the world has the kind of diversity of cultural diversity that we have throughout the federal United States. Now, in regions, you have, for example, if I go to Nebraska, right? Regionally, Nebraska is very, very insular. It's very distinct. All right. It's almost a monolith. It's not as much of a monolith as, say, Utah, but it's pretty close. Right. But that's not the same. I mean, the culture in Utah versus the culture in Nebraska, while there's certain similarities, there's vast differences as well. All right. You have urban versus rural differentials. Right. We're a far more diverse group of people as a nation, all right, as the United States, than almost anywhere else in the world. All right, so that's what that, and that's why I would rather us talk about, if we're going to compare the United States, instead of comparing it to a specific country or nation, you have to. I would like it compared to like the entirety of Europe. All right, it's a different situation, and to an extent you could say that it's apples and oranges, but it does exist. But when you talk about guns and you talk about banning a specific item, all right, and whether it's a gun, whether it's a car, or mandating that you have to have airbags in cars, for example, from a federal perspective, I totally disagree with it. If people want to mandate airbags in cars, the states could have done that. There was no need to take federal legislation, because federal overreach is so broad. It has created a very difficult dynamic when it comes to policing. Right now, let's take a look at, and I keep going back to this, and there's a reason I keep going back to it. Let's go back to the Broward County Sheriff. The Broward County Sheriff and his department had multiple contacts, multiple contacts with the guy who eventually went nuts and shot up that school. There are estimates I've seen from 30 to 60 contacts with this individual. All right, and some of those contacts include him brandishing weapons and communicating a threat, and yet no one ever did anything. Now, who's the sheriff department? All right, sheriffs in the United States. How do they get there?
Okay, before we continue going on, because I gotta wrap this up really quick. But
I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. But look, even with this, with you knowing that this guy Nicholas Cruz, with all those calls, would you not have agreed that it's not simply his right to be able to buy an AR-15? When somebody exhibits all these mental problems, would you not agree that there should be something that prevents that guy from buying a gun, and not the law-abiding citizen, but that guy should not have it, despite the right to bear?
Okay, we have a judicial...
Gentlemen, sorry, I have to leave because it's 12 o'clock. I'm just waiting for an opportunity. But MC, even if we don't agree, I appreciate your opinion. Nachi, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's nice talking to you, Torsten.
See you soon, man.
All right, bye-bye. Okay. The thing about that is this. We have a judicial system to do that. All right? And why didn't that happen? Why wasn't this person in the judicial system? All right? Because there's a reason why you lose rights when you're convicted of certain crimes.
So you do agree? Wait a second. You would agree that at one point certain people do lose rights?
Yes.
Rights aren't just simply inherent. And don't worry, I'm not going to.
No, the rights are inherent, but those rights can be stripped.
Okay. All right. Good.
Can be stripped.
That's not totalitarianism either.
No, it goes through a judicial process. Now, can there be abuses of that process? Of course there can. But there's not a process in the world that can't be abused. But there is a judicial process to remove your rights. This is why if you're a convicted felon, you can't own a firearm. It's illegal for you to purchase a firearm.
And do you agree with that?
I have no problem with that.
Okay.
Right? If you're a convicted felon and you've served your time and you've been released back into society, you should have to petition, all right, for clemency to have that right returned to you, because you were convicted of a felony. The same thing about voting rights. This is why in most states felons can't vote. You have to petition, and you should be required to petition, all right, to have that right restored because it was stripped from you, right, due to your actions. And I realize that innocent people get convicted of crimes all the time. It does happen, all right? But we have a system, a judicial system, that's supposed to work in that system to do that exact thing. It's also supposed to give redress if somebody is wrongly convicted. Is it perfect? No, but then again, there's not a perfect system out there.
Okay, well then, look, I think let's just end it with agreeing to disagree, which I hate to have to do that, because but But and I think we kind of sort of do agree on something. You yourself, or because I thought you were almost arguing from this point, which is what my problem is: the sanctimony of the Second Amendment and like this, this right that can just not be touched at all. So therefore, if somebody wants to buy a fucking rocket launcher, let them get it because it's their inherent, and that I think is. For me, that is what is the problem, and that's why we're having more mass shootings in the country than anywhere else, dude.
I see where you're making that claim, but you ignore the fact, in my opinion, right? And if you allow me this criticism of your point of view, is you ignore the fact that too many of the other side, all right, are doing the exact same thing, only in reverse. All right, they blame everybody in the NRA. They blame everybody, all right, and say that they're all just a bunch of warmongering gun nuts. All right, you're going to have disagreements.
I disagree with that.
I mean, I know you disagree with them, but they've been doing that. It's not new of how they've been talking about this issue. This is why I keep referring back to the 70s. There was a major sea change in the 70s, which some people think are for the better and some people think for the worse. I personally think that overall it's for the worse because it has led to the kind of polarization that we're dealing with within our society. It's a different discussion because it's far broader than just guns in my mind. All right. Which is one of the things about if you're going to try and focus on a very specific issue. And for example, when you're talking about the gun deaths that are going on in these schools, you see it as that is the guns are the problem. Okay. I see that the situation is a symptom of a broader issue that needs to be addressed.
Which is what? Just if you could say it real quick, what do you think it is?
I think it's there's no longer a respect for within our society for somebody else. All right. People are too narrowly focused on themselves without any concern or concentration on anybody else, or what's even worse, the rule of law.
Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't say that I wouldn't entirely agree with that, but anyway, look, we'll just leave it at that. I gotta get going right now. Thanks again, as always, MC. I mean,
I'm sorry if I took up so much of your time.
No, man, that's why I brought you in. You were making really good comments. I would have loved to have brought other people in, but then it really does become this thing. And by the way, just really quick, just to end it on this one, Count Sparkula saying, hey, Nachi, you got an idea? Go through a gun shop and try to purchase a firearm. See for yourself how the laws are. I will be doing that pretty soon, before the end of this year. Obviously, I'm not going to give away the gun that I want to buy and stuff, but and he says still behind on the stream. By the way, there's a very delayed reaction. Anyway, the point is, I do not see the harm in having that one extra step. I know it sounds like a hurdle and all that, but that could have prevented someone like Nicholas Cruz from doing that. And that's where, fuck it, we'll leave it at that. And dude, I really appreciate you as one of the listeners and stuff. I always think you have really good points. You stumble me, so that's why.
I wasn't intended to stump you or anything, and I do appreciate you allowing me to come on to talk about this.
And I'm glad you didn't. There were moments where I felt like we were arguing, and I was like, "No, that's not what I want to do," and I hope it doesn't come across that way. But
no. I mean, I don't think that. I think that most people understand that you're going to have disagreements, and you can say that that's arguing if you have a disagreement. I mean, that is a one of the definitions for it. But I don't think that we're necessarily arguing. There's obviously no vitriol or anything there. Mainly because you're not. This is a good faith effort on your part, okay? And what I mean by that is you might want, even if you had wanted to ban all guns, the conversation would go the same way. The difference is you're not looking at somebody else who has a different opinion and basically trying to dehumanize them.
No, of course not. Yeah, I would never.
Yeah.
Even though when I talk about people like Rachel Maddow and fucking Chris Hayes and Noam Chomsky, and I need to learn how to relax. I cannot get so.
As opposed to me, have you seen some of the streams that I've been in recently?
No, man, there's only so much time I have. That's the problem. That's the problem. I can only imagine. Dude.
You're far more calm and relaxed on these streams than I'll ever be, dude. Your patience with this is far superior to mine.
Cool. Glad to hear that, bro. Well, thanks again, man, and thank you everybody for listening. Really appreciate that. Sorry I couldn't let other people in. It just becomes a clusterfuck, and then what's the point? But thanks everybody for the comments. And we'll all be talking, man. Night. I want to end it right now real quick.